I pay an extra $200 a month just to live on the top floor. It's too much money, especially since the building has no elevator. But I pay it without blinking. I don't care about the view. I don't care about the noise from the roof. I pay for it because I need to know one thing for sure. I need to know that there is nothing underneath me but solid concrete. I haven't stepped foot in a basement since the summer of 2017. I physically can't do it. If I walk over a ventilation grate on a sidewalk and catch a whiff of that subterranean air, that mix of wet dust, mildew, and stale darkness, my throat closes up. I dry heave, because I know what hides in that smell. I know what the sound of heavy, wet breathing is like when it rises through the floorboards directly beneath your feet. You think you're safe in your own home. You operate under the assumption that walls keep things out and locks keep you secure. You think that because you are alone in a room, you are actually alone. But I'm telling you right now, you have no idea who or what is waiting for you to turn off the lights. It happened just after I turned 18. I was fresh out of high school, stuck in that suffocating limbo between being a teenager and an adult. I was broke, aimless, and desperate to save up for community college in the fall. I was taking every odd job I could find: landscaping, painting fences, hauling trash, anything that paid cash under the table. So, when my Aunt Carol called and asked if I wanted to house sit for her while she went to Florida for 10 days, I didn't just say yes. I felt like I'd won the lottery. Aunt Carol lived about 30 minutes out of town in a massive, sprawling farmhouse built sometime in the 1920s. It was isolated, set back from the main road down a half-mile gravel driveway that wound through dense woods before opening up into acres of cornfields. It was the kind of house that had character, which is just a polite way of saying it was drafty, creaky, and settled into the earth like a heavy stone. She offered me $300 and a fully stocked fridge. All I had to do was feed her 2 cats, Mittens and Oreo, water a jungle of indoor ferns, and make sure the place didn't burn down. I remember packing my bag that Tuesday afternoon with a sense of vibration in my chest. I threw in my Xbox, a stack of games, my headset, and enough clothes for a week. I was picturing absolute freedom. No parents nagging me about chores, no curfew, no younger brother blasting music. Just me, a pepperoni pizza, and Call of Duty until the sun came up. Aunt Carol was in a rush when I arrived. Her bags were already by the door, and a taxi was idling in the driveway. The tour was a blur of instructions. The back door latch is sticky, she said, practically running through the kitchen. You have to lift and push to get the deadbolt to seat properly. Make sure you do it every night. We're miles from the sheriff's station. I nodded, absorbing about half of it. Got it. Lift and push. She paused at the door under the stairs. It was a solid oak door with an old-fashioned crystal knob. And don't worry about the basement. I've got it locked up. There's nothing down there but the furnace and some old boxes of your uncle's stuff. It's damp, so just leave it be. Locked. Damp. Got it, I said. She hugged me, smelling of lavender and hairspray, and then she was gone. The taxi crunched away down the gravel drive, the sound fading until silence rushed back in to fill the void. And God, it was silent. It wasn't the quiet of an empty room. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of the country. The only sounds were the wind rustling the dry stalks of corn and the house itself, the old wood groaning as it cooled down from the midday heat. The first 48 hours were paradise. I lived like a king. I ordered pizza from the one place that delivered this far out. I blasted music without headphones, and I gamed until my eyes burned. I felt untouchable. But on the third day, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It started around noon. I was in the kitchen, standing at the island making a sandwich, when the smell hit me. It wasn't a gradual thing. It didn't waft in. It was suddenly there, catching in the back of my throat like a physical object. It was organic, heavy. It smelled like wet wool left to rot in a sauna, but underneath that musk, there was something sharp and metallic. It tasted like old pennies, like copper. I stopped spreading mayo on my bread and sniffed the air. It was nauseating. I checked the trash can, empty. I checked the fridge, nothing spoiled. I walked into the laundry room to check the litter box, but Carol had just changed it before she left, and the cats had barely used it. Dead mouse, I muttered to myself. It was an old farmhouse. Mice in the walls were par for the course. I figured one had died in the drywall behind the pantry and was starting to turn in the summer heat. I grabbed a can of Ocean Breeze air freshener from under the sink and sprayed the entire first floor until a chemical fog hung in the air. It masked the smell, layering a sickly sweet floral scent over the rot. I went back to the living room, put my headset on, and blocked out the world. I told myself it was nothing. I ignored my own instincts. That was my first mistake. That night, around 11:30 p.m., the isolation stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling predatory. I was deep into a match, sitting on the couch in the dark, the room illuminated only by the frantic flickering of the TV screen. Usually, Mittens and Oreo slept on the cushions next to me, soaking up the heat from the electronics. They were lazy, affectionate cats. But when the match ended and the lobby screen loaded, I realized I was cold. The air in the room had dropped 10 degrees. I looked around for the cats. They weren't on the couch. Both of them were sitting in the hallway, about 10 feet away. They were frozen statues, sitting side by side. Their posture was wrong, stiff, alert, their ears swiveled forward. Their fur was puffed up along their spines, making them look twice their size. They weren't looking at me. They were both staring intensely at the door under the stairs. The basement door. "What is it, guys?" I asked, sliding one side of my headset off. They didn't break eye contact with the door. Oreo let out a low, guttural growl. It wasn't a normal meow. It was that deep, primal vibration animals make when they sense a predator. A warning. The hair on the back of my arms stood up. The chemical flowers of the air freshener had faded, and the smell was back. Stronger now. That copper, rotting meat stench was seeping out from the hairline cracks around the doorframe. I stood up, my knees popping. "It's just the furnace," I whispered. I was talking to myself more than the cats. I walked over to the hallway. The smell was overpowering here, like I was standing inside a butcher shop that had lost power for a week. I reached out and touched the crystal doorknob. It was ice cold. Condensation was slick on the glass facets. I tried to turn it. Locked. Solid. Aunt Carol had locked it, and I didn't even have the key. "See," I said to the cats, my voice cracking slightly. "Locked. Nothing's in there." I turned around to head back to the couch. Thump. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sound hadn't come from the walls. It hadn't come from the pipes. It was the distinct, heavy sound of a boot taking a single step on concrete. And it came from directly beneath the floorboards I was standing on. I held my breath. The house was dead silent. The cats bolted, scrambling up the stairs to hide under the guest bed, their claws scrabbling on the hardwood. Thump. Drag. My stomach dropped into my shoes. It sounded like someone taking a step with a heavy left foot, and then dragging a limp right leg across the floor. Thump. Drag. "Hello." I called out. Why did I do that? Why do we always call out? Silence. My mind started racing. Squatters? Had someone broken in through a basement window? Carol said she had it locked up, but maybe a window latch had failed. I ran to the kitchen and checked the back door. The deadbolt was thrown. I checked every window on the first floor. Locked tight. I needed fresh air. The smell was making me dizzy, and the claustrophobia of the house was suddenly crushing me. I unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch, sucking in the humid night air. The moon was full, illuminating the gravel driveway and the wall of cornstalks that lined the property. I walked to the edge of the porch, trying to slow my heart rate. "You're being paranoid, Jared," I whispered. "Old houses make noises. Furnaces rattle." I looked out toward the edge of the woods, where the driveway curved out of sight. And then I stopped breathing. There was a man standing at the edge of the cornfield. He was about 50 yards away, half obscured by the shadows of the stalks. He wasn't moving. He wasn't walking up the driveway. He was just standing there. He looked wrong. Even from this distance, he looked wrong. He was wearing a heavy flannel shirt, despite the heat, and his jeans were held up by a piece of yellow nylon rope. His hair was long and stringy, hanging in greasy curtains around his face. But it was his posture that terrified me. He was leaning forward slightly, his arms hanging limp at his sides, perfectly still. He was watching the house. He was watching me. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air washed over me. This wasn't a neighbor. Neighbors didn't stand in the dark at midnight watching 18-year-olds on a porch. "Hey," I shouted, trying to sound aggressive. "Can I help you?" The man didn't flinch. He didn't answer. He just slowly raised one hand and pointed. Not at me. He pointed at the side of the house, toward the basement windows. Then, without a sound, he stepped backward into the cornfield and vanished. The stalks swallowed him instantly. I scrambled backward, fumbling for the door handle. I threw myself inside the house and slammed the door, locking the deadbolt, the chain, and the handle lock. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the keys. "Okay," I panted. "Okay, someone is out there." I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife from the butcher block. I checked the back door again. I checked the windows again. I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me, conflicting with the fear. It's a prowler, I thought. It's just some creep outside. The fear was external. The threat was out there, in the corn, and I was in here, behind solid oak doors and locked windows. I was safe inside. I spent the next 2 hours sitting on the couch with the lights off, the knife in my lap, watching the driveway through the sheer curtains. I waited for him to come back. I waited for the sound of glass breaking or a handle jiggling. But the drifter never came back to the porch. The outside was quiet. I eventually convinced myself he was just a vagrant passing through, looking for an easy robbery, spooked off by me shouting. I stayed on the couch that night. I didn't want to go upstairs and be trapped on the second floor. I kept the TV on low for comfort. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion took over. I drifted into a restless sleep, clutching the knife handle. That was the night the camera caught me. I didn't know it then, of course. But while I was sleeping, believing I had locked the bad man out, the door under the stairs slowly creaked open. The next morning, the sun was shining, bleaching the color out of the cornfields. I felt foolish. In the light of day, the man in the cornfield felt like a nightmare, a trick of the moonlight and my own exhaustion. But the smell was worse. It had baked into the upholstery during the heat of the day. It wasn't just in the hallway anymore. It was permeating the living room rugs, the curtains, my clothes. It smelled like roadkill steaming on hot asphalt. I spent the day pacing. I checked the locks every hour. I drank too much coffee. I told myself I was leaving first thing in the morning. I'd make up an excuse for Aunt Carol. Family emergency, sickness, anything. I just needed to get through one more night. That night, the weather turned. A summer storm rolled in off the plains, bringing violence with it. By 10 p.m., the wind was whipping against the vinyl siding so hard it sounded like handfuls of gravel were being thrown at the house. Thunder shook the window panes in their frames. I was in the living room, trying to watch a movie to calm my nerves. I had the volume turned up to drown out the wind. The butcher knife was sitting on the coffee table next to my soda. At 11:45 p.m., the power flickered. The TV died. The lamps buzzed and dimmed to a brown, sickly glow, then cut out completely. Pitch black. "Great," I whispered. The silence of the house rushed back in, louder than the storm outside. I used my phone as a flashlight. The beam cut a thin, shaking cone through the darkness. I decided I needed to get to the fuse box. I knew from the tour that the breaker panel was in the utility closet off the kitchen. To get to the kitchen, I had to walk past the hallway, past the basement door. I crept across the living room rug, my socks sliding silently. I swept the phone light back and forth. Shadows jumped and stretched against the walls. I reached the hallway and swung the light toward the stairs. I stopped dead in my tracks. The basement door was open. Not wide open, just a crack. Maybe 2 inches of absolute darkness slicing through the white paint of the doorframe. I stopped breathing. I knew for a fact that I had checked that door. I had tried the knob. It was locked. The smell was overpowering now. It was a physical wall. It washed over me, smelling of raw sewage, wet dog, and old blood. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded tiny. Then, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to slush. It came from the darkness of the basement stairs. It drifted up through that 2-inch crack. Sniff. It was a deep, wet inhale, long and shuddering. Someone was standing directly on the other side of the door, smelling me. Then, a voice spoke. "Jared." My knees almost buckled. It wasn't the drifter's raspy voice I expected. It wasn't a deep, scary monster voice. It sounded like me. It was a perfect recording of my own voice, played back flat and emotionless. "Jared, come, here." I backed away, raising the phone light with a trembling hand. "Who's there?" I screamed. "I have a knife. Get out." The door to the basement slowly creaked open further. The creak. A hand reached out from the darkness and gripped the doorframe. It was a filthy hand. The fingernails were black with dirt and long, curled over like talons. The skin was gray and covered in weeping sores. Then, the face peered around the frame. It was him, the man from the cornfield, the drifter, but he looked worse up close. He was shirtless now. His skin was pale, skeletal, his ribs heaving with every breath. He was smiling that same, impossible, gum-bleeding smile. His eyes were wide, unblinking, adjusting to the flashlight beam like a nocturnal animal. He stepped out into the hallway. He was holding something in his other hand. It was a long, rusty screwdriver. He tilted his head, mimicking a confused dog. Safe inside. He wheezed, mocking my thoughts from the night before. Locked. Safe. He took a step toward me. I didn't think. I didn't fight. My body just reacted. I turned and sprinted for the front door. I hit the hardwood of the foyer and scrambled, my socks losing traction. I slammed into the door and fumbled with the deadbolt. My fingers were sweating so much I couldn't get a grip on the metal turn latch. Behind me, I heard him running. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't a stumble. It was the fast, rhythmic slapping of bare feet sprinting on wood. Silent. Deadly fast. I got the deadbolt open. I yanked the handle. I felt a cold, wet hand brush the back of my t-shirt. I screamed and threw my whole body weight forward. I tumbled out onto the porch, falling hard onto the wet wood, scraping the skin off my elbows. I didn't look back. I scrambled up and ran for my car in the driveway. The rain was pouring down, blinding me. The mud sucked at my shoes. I reached my car. I dove into the driver's seat and slammed the door. I hit the lock button just as a face slammed into the driver's side window. Thud. He was pressed against the glass. He was licking the window. His tongue was sliding across the glass, leaving a thick streak of saliva and blood. He was laughing, a silent, shaking laugh, while he smashed the handle of the screwdriver against the metal of the door. Clang, clang, clang. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them on the floor mat, found them with shaking hands, and jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it in reverse and floored it. Tires spun in the mud, then caught gravel. The headlights swept over him as I backed out of the driveway. He wasn't chasing me. He was standing in the rain, shirtless, holding that screwdriver. He was waving, a slow, mocking wave, like a neighbor saying goodbye. I drove to the police station doing 80 miles an hour. I ran into the lobby crying, shaking, covered in mud. They thought I was on drugs until I showed them the video from my phone. Just 3 seconds of shaky footage showing the open basement door and the gray hand gripping the frame. They sent a SWAT team out to the farmhouse. When they got there, the man was gone. The cornfields were empty. The front door was swinging in the wind. But what they found in the basement, that's the part that I can't get out of my head. That's the part that keeps me awake at night. They went down the stairs. They found a crawl space behind the furnace, hidden behind a loose piece of plywood. Inside the crawl space, they found a sleeping bag. It was filthy, stiff with mold. They found dozens of empty food wrappers, granola bars, cracker boxes, cans of tuna. All food from Aunt Carol's pantry. He hadn't broken in that night. Based on the amount of trash and waste, the police determined that he had been living in that basement for at least 3 weeks. He was there before Aunt Carol left for Florida. He was there when she gave me the keys. He was there every single night I was sitting 10 feet above him, playing video games. The external bulkhead door, the storm doors leading to the backyard, had a broken lock. He had been coming and going as he pleased. When I saw him in the cornfield, he wasn't trying to get in. He was just watching me panic. He knew he could get back inside whenever he wanted. And the smell? The police found a pile of trophies in the corner of the crawl space. He had been trapping neighborhood stray cats. He had a pile of collars. The smell of rot I had been inhaling for 3 days. It was coming from the corner of that room. But the worst part wasn't the cats. The police found a cheap digital camera tucked into the bottom of the sleeping bag. They confiscated it as evidence, but the detective, a guy named Miller, made the mistake of telling me what was on the SD card. There were pictures of me. There were pictures of me sleeping on the couch on the first night. Pictures of me eating cereal in the kitchen. But the last photo was time-stamped at 3:03 a.m. on the night I saw him in the cornfield. The night I locked all the doors and sat on the couch with the knife, thinking I was safe. It was a close-up of the back of my neck. He had come back inside through the basement. He had walked up the stairs. He had stood directly behind the couch while I was gripping that knife, staring out the window. He had been close enough to touch me. He had been breathing that rotten, copper air down my neck, and I never even turned around. I don't house sit anymore. I don't go to rural areas. I live on the 3rd floor of a city apartment where the ground is 50 feet down. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, Or when I walk past a storm drain on a hot day, I catch a whiff of that smell. That heavy, wet copper. And I remember the lesson that cost me my sanity. Locks only work if the monster is on the outside.